Okay then, Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Welcome to the Harborne Islamic Study Circle HISC Seerah session 154. Quick recap, inshallah, we'll try and get through today's fairly quickly. So a quick recap. Last week we did the fact, it was the second session we did on the Battle of Khaybar. We talked about one of the slaves converting during the battle. He was told to take his sheep and goats back that he was looking after for his master. He became a Muslim and then he became Shaheed and obviously enters into one of the highest ranks in Jannah because of that without having prayed. We also talked about a Bedouin. This story comes in a few battles, but Bukhari mentions that there was a Bedouin fighter who was fighting for fame and courage. So people would say, what a brave warrior he is. And then whenever his name was mentioned, how fiercely he's fighting, the Prophet said he's going to be in hellfire. And then somebody sneaks around and spies on him and sees that he actually committed suicide on the battlefield after being injured. So he wasn't fighting for the right intention, and also obviously his ending was not a good ending. And we talked about how phase 2 of the battles, the other forts, fell one by one because half the forts are in one part of Khaybar, the other half of the forts are in a different part. One of the fortresses, which was impregnable, nigh on impossible to defeat because it's on the higher ground. They caught a spy who told them that if you cut off the water supply, that's a way which will force the people out to fight. And then when they took over that fortress, they found lots of catapults and testudos, which were then later deployed by Muslims in other battles. Talked about the story about the little girl who started her menses while she was sitting on the Prophet's camel, and then he told her to clean it with salt and water, and he gave her a necklace at the end of the battle. And then the remaining tribes and fortresses in Khaybar, they decided to surrender. And then after negotiation, the Prophet allowed them to stay, but all the wealth would be given over. The properties would be given over to the Muslims. Half the produce from the harvest would be given to the Muslims, and the remaining Jewish tribes there will be in charge of all the maintenance and the labor costs and the farming for everything else. And Muslims could cancel the agreement at any point in time. In total, we said about 93 Jews died and about 19 or so Muslims were martyred. Talked about a slave who stole a cloak from the spoils of war, and he will be condemned to hell because of that. And the Prophet mentioned that is burning him, wrapped around and burning his soul. And the last story we talked about, Abi al-Huqaiq's 2 sons were concealing a bag full of jewels and money, and the wealth relating to Huyay bin al-Akhtab, that was being hidden as well. And Prophet asked Zubair to rough up somebody who finally said the gold is probably hidden in some part of a valley. And then because these guys broke the treaty that they shouldn't conceal any wealth, they were put to death. And Safiya, the daughter of Huyay, was taken as a captive as well. And we'll talk, inshallah, next week about the Prophet's marriage to Safiya, the daughter of Huyay, inshallah. So today, now that the Prophet has taken over all of the tribes in Khaybar, all the fortresses, he now controls all of that. and following the surrender, what happened is that some of the Jewish tribes they wanted to throw a lavish banquet for the Prophet ﷺ. Throwing a banquet for the victorious army now that it had rested, and there was one lady in particular named Zainab. She's the widowed wife of someone called Salam ibn Mishkam. So she took it on herself to become the main chef for this meal. And again, it's just like, well, you've conquered us, fair enough, here's a big banquet in your honor. So the Muslims were going to sit down for that meal. Zainab, she then inquires what part does the Prophet ﷺ enjoy of the lamb, because they'd cooked a whole lamb, and she was told that the Prophet ﷺ, he prefers, out of his own preference, the shoulder of the lamb to any other joint. So this is a particular thing that the Prophet ﷺ, he enjoyed the shoulder of the lamb. So what she did was that she decided to poison the food, and then she put extra poison on the shoulder of the lamb. So she cooks it, but then obviously she cooks it with poison, and then she puts some extra poison on the shoulder of the lamb, knowing that the Prophet ﷺ would enjoys that part of the dish. So then she brings it to the camp. The Muslims are all sat there. Obviously, they're unaware that anything like this is going to happen. And they just think it's a celebration meal. So she puts the food down, and then the Prophet ﷺ thanked her, and the Sahabi and the Prophet ﷺ sit down to eat. And the Prophet ﷺ, he was sat next to someone called Bishr, the son of Bara, Bishr ibn Bara, and he's from Medina. He's from the tribe of Khazraj. So there, Bishr, he's actually quite a high-ranking Muslim. He was one of the Muslims of the second pledge of Aqaba, and he'd been the first ever to in Yathrib to pray the ritual prayer in the direction of Makkah. So, and we talked about how when the Muslims were in Medina, they would pray towards Jerusalem. But then he was the first one who then prayed in the direction of Makkah. So the Prophet ﷺ, he then, with all the food in front of him, he took the lamb, took the shoulder of the lamb, had put the poisoned shoulder of the lamb in his mouth. Bishr, because everyone's waiting for the Prophet ﷺ, he needs to start first before other people start. Again, that's just etiquette. So Bishr did the same, and he took some meat and he swallowed it. But as soon as the Prophet ﷺ put it in his mouth, he spat it out, and then he told all the others, hold off, don't eat it. And he goes, this shoulder, the meat, is telling me it's been poisoned. So again, this was one of the miracles, where the actual cooked meat was able to tell the Prophet ﷺ, I have been poisoned. So the Prophet ﷺ then called out, who made the food. So they gathered all the Jewish tribes who'd helped prepare the food, and the Prophet ﷺ, he didn't let them know that he knew the food was poisoned. So he asked them all, if I ask you anything, will you tell me the truth? And they said, yeah, of course we will. And again, the Prophet ﷺ, as prophet and as victor, they said, of course we'll tell you the truth. So he said to them, who is your ancestor? So who are you related to? Where did you draw your ancestral line? And they said, we're all from such and such a person. And the Prophet says, no, that's not true, you're lying. And then he tells them who is their actual ancestor, so which tribe are they actually from. So it's probably that they were a bit embarrassed about that particular one. It may be a lowly ancestor or a lowly section of the tribe, which is why they didn't want to admit where they're from. So then so they said, yeah, you're right. So then the Prophet says to them again, if I ask you a question, will you be honest with me? And they goes, Ya Abul Qasim, you've already exposed our lie, so of course we're going to be honest. And because they didn't call him Rasulullah, they called him by his kunya, which is, the father of Qasim, his firstborn boy. So the Prophet then asked all the people gathered, who is going to go to the fire of hell? So the Jewish elders, they replied, we will go for a short period of time, then Allah will save us because we're the chosen people. And you and your people will remain in hell forever. And this is their belief, obviously, because they didn't accept him as the Prophet. And this was also mentioned in Surah Al-Baqarah. Allah talks about this, where they think that they will remain in hellfire only for a short time. And then Allah says in the Quran, you have no evidence for this. You're just making this up. And the Prophet then again, he corrects them and he goes, remain and humiliated in the fire of hell, you will be, and by Allah, we will not remain after you. So again, he's trying to clear up this misconception. So then he says for the third time, will you tell me the truth? If I ask you something, he says, yes. So he goes, did you poison this lamb or this goat? So they knew that the game is up. They did try to poison it. And so they said, yes, we did. So then they sent for the person that actually cooked the food. And he asked her, did you poison this? And then she goes, well, who told you? And then the Prophet said, well, the shoulder itself spoke to me and told me. And so the Prophet asked her, well, why did you poison the food? And she goes, well, because of what you've done to my people. You've killed my father and my uncle and my husband. So she's got a personal grudge. She's got her own skin in the game. Right? So this was personal for her. Her father, her uncle, and her husband were all killed in the fighting. And then again, because of what they've done to the whole, proud peoples, they've all been vanquished. And so she tries to then justify it by saying, she said, I told myself, if he's a king, then we'll get rid of him. He'll eat this poison stuff and we'll get rid of him. But if he's a prophet, he will be informed of the poison. So then I've got nothing to worry about. So if he is really a prophet, then fine. So again, just a very twisted justification. Nonetheless, the Prophet pardoned this lady Zainab, right? Because she eventually spoke the truth and he hadn't swallowed it. And then he pardoned her. However, a few of the Sahabi fell ill because they'd taken some in the mouth, so they were all tended to. They were sick for a while, and the one who sat next to the Prophet, Bishr ibn Bara, he actually passed away because he'd actually swallowed it, it's narrated that because he swallowed the poison and died, the Prophet then called for this lady Zainab, and she was then killed because of that, because it's an eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth. This is the punishment for her, is that her poison killed Bishr, but he had initially forgiven her for this. But the other thing, and we'll do this inshallah in many months' time, is that the Prophet ﷺ said that he felt the pain of that mouth of poison in his mouth for the rest of his life, for the remaining 3 or 4 years of his life. And in fact, on his deathbed, when he only had a few days left, he turned around to Aisha and he said, I can still feel the effects of the poison from that woman in Khaybar. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had sort of protected him from the effects of the poison. But then in his last days, some of the scholars say that Allah lifted the veil of protection from the Prophet ﷺ. So the effect of the poison took full, hold on his weakened body already, because he was in the process of dying. So the Prophet ﷺ would also gain the reward for being a shaheed as well, for having been martyred. Anyway, so that's the story of Zainab, who tried to poison the Prophet ﷺ. A couple of other short stories is the arrival of Jafar ibn Abi Talib. So again, if we're going back many months, when the Muslims were being persecuted, the Prophet ﷺ and a lot of the nobles, the Prophet ﷺ allowed them to emigrate to Abyssinia, to the Najashi, the Negus, and a few of them went. Then about a dozen, then they came back when they heard the false rumor following the revelation of Surah Najm that the Quraysh had become Muslims. So they came back, and then they found out actually it was just a false rumor. And then a second wave of immigrants went to Abyssinia. So in total, 70 or 80 or more went to Abyssinia, and their leader, the appointed emir, was Jafar ibn Abi Talib, who again is the cousin of the Prophet ﷺ, who is the eldest brother of Ali ibn Abi Talib. So Ali was raised by the Prophet ﷺ, but the Prophet ﷺ is far, far older than Ali. One of the Prophet ﷺ's contemporaries was Jafar ibn Abi Talib, who was one of the Prophet ﷺ's best friends. They were cousins, they were buddies. So the Prophet ﷺ appoints Jafar, and they're living in Abyssinia for over a decade. So they went in the 5th or the 6th year of Hijri. Now we're into the 6th, 7th year after the Hijrah. So the Prophet ﷺ sent Amr bin Umayyah to the court of the Najashi with the message to the king of Ethiopia to ask him to facilitate the departure of the Muslims back from Ethiopia, Abyssinia, to Medina. So the Najashi, he arranged 2 boats for them. And again, these guys have been living as refugees, but protected refugees. So he arranged 2 boats, and they then, came back, all of them. When they docked on the Arabian Peninsula, they found out that the Prophet ﷺ is not in Medina. He's actually gone to Khaybar, because again, he's been in Khaybar for nearly a month on this battle. So rather than going to Medina and waiting there, they decided to reroute and go direct to Khaybar. So they went direct to Khaybar. They arrived there, and it said they arrived there on the day that the last fort had been captured. And so again, between 50 and 100 Muslims from Abyssinia, they arrive to the Prophet ﷺ when he'd captured Khaybar. And it's stated that the Prophet ﷺ, when he saw Jafar bin Abi Talib, one of his best friends, he stands up, takes 16 steps forward to receive Jafar, and kisses him on the forehead and says, I don't know what brings me more joy or happiness, whether that I have met you after so many years, or for the fact that Allah has opened the forts of the Jews for us through your brother Ali. So basically saying, look, it's such a momentous day that we've captured Khaybar. And again, just putting that into context, Khaybar were really a thorn in the side of the Muslims and the Prophet ﷺ, because they were one of the chief financiers against the Muslims. Saying, I don't know what's brought me more happiness, destroying these guys and taking over Khaybar, or the fact that you've come back from Abyssinia after over 10 years. So, and again, putting it into context, they've been battling, the Jews of Khaybar for nigh on a month, right? And it's a huge wealth that they've accumulated. The agreements mean that Khaybar was one of the most fertile lands in the whole of the Arabian Peninsula, and they generated a huge amount of wealth. And the Prophet was saying, despite all of that, getting rid of this trouble, having all this huge wealth, it's on a par with him seeing Jafar ibn Abi Talib. And the other thing is that the Muslims who came back from Abyssinia, although they came back at the end of the fighting, they were given a share of the booty of Khaybar. So again, this is an amazing barakah, blessing for the people. They sacrificed everything, and they've been living as exiles, as refugees in Abyssinia, given up all their wealth, given up their homeland, given up their families, and they arrive back just to see the Prophet ﷺ in Khaybar, and they're given, a part of this huge wealth from Khaybar. Again, everyone essentially becomes like a millionaire because of the conquest in Khaybar. So all the fighters, and it said that now the Muslims could actually give their properties back to the Aus and the Khazraj. Because if we rewind and we go back to the first year of Hijrah, Prophet he made this pact of brotherhood between the people who had emigrated, done the Hijrah from Makkah to Medina, and the Ansaris, brothers, the Aus and the Khazraj. They were made brothers, and a lot of them had shared their property or given up property for a lot of the people from Makkah, because the people from Makkah had basically abandoned everything. They'd come with nothing. And it said now that they'd captured Khaybar, and it's a huge amount of wealth. Essentially that all of the people from Makkah, they'd become like millionaires, and they were able then to give back their the properties that they'd been given by the Ansari back to the Ansari, the people of the Ansar. Again, this is huge, huge blessings. And again, these blessings are for the people of Abyssinia, because they'd given everything, they'd given up everything, gone to a foreign land, emigrated. They're foreigners. They had to learn a new civilization, a new culture, interaction with other people. They left everything behind. They were in Abyssinia during an Abyssinian civil war, when the nephew of the Najashi tried to overthrow the Najashi, and things were so perilous that Najashi had actually prepared a couple of boats that, should he be killed and his government be toppled, the Muslims could straight away go straight to the coast, get on the boats, and come over back to Arabia. But in the end, and that was a critical night, and we talked about this, how that evening all the Muslims were making dua that the coup wouldn't work against Najashi, and the Najashi got through that, and they didn't need to escape. But they were, and one of the reasons that the nephew of the Najashi gave to launch this coup against him was the fact that the Najashi was so sympathetic to the Muslims. He was so sympathetic to these refugees, right? So they were really in the middle of the vice in Abyssinia. And so, although not fighting, Allah blessed them with a lot of the wealth from Khaybar. And again, just goes to show that Allah looks after the people who put their trust in Allah. If you go through a lot of hardship, then Allah promises us ease. Linked to this story of the Abyssinian people, although this particular conversation didn't happen until the Muslims got back to Medina, but we'll just talk about it now because it links to this. And it's the story of Asma binti Umais. Now, she's one of those early Muslims who emigrated from Makkah to Abyssinia. So Asma binti Umais. So when they come back, she visits her best friend that she hasn't seen for over 10 years, her BFF. And this is Hafsa binti Umar, the daughter of Umar bin al-Khattab. And Hafsa is the wife of the Prophet ﷺ. So they're chilling out, they're exchanging stories of what's happened in Abyssinia and what's happened with the Prophet ﷺ, what's happened in all these 10 years, and they're catching up. And then obviously Umar, he walks in and he sees his daughter Hafsa with Asma, and obviously times have changed. But again, so he asks Hafsa, "Who's this lady with you?" And she goes, "Well, this is Asma binti Umais." And Umar says, "Binti Umais, the Habashi, is she the seafaring lady?" So he's starting to tease Asma binti Umais. And again, you can get, although it's not recorded, you get a sense that there might have been some rumors going around in Medina about the status of the people of Abyssinia, and so Umar possibly uses those rumors and says something to Asma and says basically, because he's not going to say something plucked out of the air. There's obviously some other conversations that are going on that we don't know about. So he goes, "Is this Binti Umais? Is she the Habashi? Is she the seafaring lady?" And then he turns to her and says, we have more right to the Prophet than you do, because we immigrated to Medina with him. So obviously we don't know the context in which this has happened, but he's basically saying, look, we did hijrah with the Prophet ﷺ. And so and he's seeing what type of response he gets, and basically saying, look, you guys have, you've been away for 10 years, and we've been living here fighting with the Prophet ﷺ, defending him. You guys are coming after 6-7 years after the hijrah, and then you're getting all this glory, getting all this wealth. There may be some of that undertone. But then Asma binti Umay, she sort of gets frustrated, and she sort of answers back and says, "No, wallahi, you don't have more right over the Prophet ﷺ. You were with him for these 10 years. He would console you in times of grief. He would feed you when you were hungry. He would guide you when you were mistaken. But we suffered, we toiled, and we were in a strange land with nobody. Wallahi, I won't eat or drink until I go and tell the Prophet ﷺ what you have said. And then you can see for yourself who is right, who is wrong." So again, quite a forthright response from Asma. So she storms over, literally, to the Prophet ﷺ's masjid. The Prophet ﷺ's there. So in front of the Prophet ﷺ, in front of all the Sahabi, she starts, saying, "This is what happened. Umar came in, and this is what he said." And she goes, "Ya Rasulullah, Umar said this, I said this." And so the Prophet ﷺ, he heard her out, and then he says, "He does not have any more right than you. Go back and tell him that. And tell him that he made one hijrah, whereas you are the people of 2 hijrahs." Right? So again, the Prophet ﷺ is elevating the ranks of the people of Abyssinia. And again, we talked before what an immensely traumatic thing hijrah was, and how much reward you get for doing the hijrah. And the Prophet ﷺ is saying, look, you guys have done 2 hijrahs. You went to Abyssinia, that was 1 hijrah, and then you came over here, that's the 2nd hijrah. And so Asma, she goes back, and then she tells this to Umar and to Hafsa, and then the rumor spreads around all of the people who'd come back from Abyssinia. And it said in the books of Hadith that there were literally queues of people outside her house they would come in and they would say to her, tell us what the Prophet ﷺ said. And so she would go through this whole thing. Umar said this, I said this, I went to the Prophet, and this is what the Prophet said. We have more, they have no more right. They done one hijrah, we've done 2 hijrahs. And it's said that the people from Abyssinia were never happier than this day for learning that they'd done 2 hijrahs. And there's one Sahabi who would listen to what Asma said. He would go out, he'd go back to the end of the queue, and he'd come back so he could listen to the story again. He'd go out, and then he'd come back so he could listen to the story again. And so this is a nice story. So again, it happened a few days later when they got back to Medina, but it's nice to put it in here. Another really important event that happened at this time, and it's well documented, is there's another person who emigrated to Medina, one of the most famous of the Sahabi. And he is, what's his full name? He's from Yemen. His full name is Abdurrahman ibn Sakhr from the tribe of Ad-Daws. And he is better known by his kunya as Abu Hurairah. So Abu Hurairah, this is when he arrives in Medina and becomes a Sahabi, is at the end of the Battle of Khaybar, and it's well recorded, and he's well known because, why?
I know the name, I just can't remember why.
Abu Hurairah, why? Zayn? So Abu Hurairah is really famous because he has narrated the most number of hadith that we have in the books of Sunnah, right? And he is far and away above the others. So Abu Hurairah, he narrates. We talked before about how Aisha narrates a lot of hadith. She's the highest narrating of the females. She's narrated 2,210 hadith in the books of Sahih. Above her, let's go down. From the prolific narrators of hadith, there's Abu Sa'id al-Khudri. He narrates 1,170. There's Jabir ibn Abdullah. He narrates 1,540. Abdullah ibn Abbas, he relates 1,660. al-Mu'mineen, Aisha, she narrates 2,210. Anas ibn Malik, and he was gifted as a servant to the Prophet ﷺ when the Prophet ﷺ arrived in Medina. So Anas's mum gifted Anas to the Prophet ﷺ, again when he was under 10 years old. So he's lived his 10 years serving in the house of the Prophet ﷺ. Anas ibn Malik, he narrates 2,286. The son of Umar ibn al-Khattab, Abdullah ibn Umar, he narrated 2,630. But well out in front is Abu Hurairah, who's narrated 5,374. So he's Premier League of narrators, right? And a lot of people who criticize Abu Hurairah, and there are people who criticize Abu Hurairah and Aisha because of what happened many years later. They say, well, how can he become a Muslim so late? This is 7th year Hijrah. This is after the Battle of Khaybar. And yet he narrates 5,374 hadith. And he addresses this criticism later on. I'll come on to that in a second. But basically, he arrives from Yemen with his tribe of Ad-Daws. They were on their way to Medina. They found out that the Prophet ﷺ is in Khaybar. They also divert and they go to Khaybar at this point in time. Again, probably a few days here or there, either side of when the Abyssinians get there. But despite the fact that they weren't part of the fighting, they weren't given part of the spoils of booty like the people of Abyssinia. However, the Prophet ﷺ, he asked the Muslims for permission to give the tribe of Ad-Daws some of the spoils of Khaybar, and the people agreed, and there's a small group of them. So Abu Hurairah, he accompanies the Prophet ﷺ for a little over 3 years and a month, and he narrates all of these hadith. And the reason is that despite having a family, he stayed for a long time he opted to live in the Masjid al-Nabawi as one of the people of Sufa, right? And he would spend a lot of his time in spiritual exercises, in devotions. He would do Qiyamul Layl. He would stay up the night in prayer. And again, his wife and his children would do the same. He would stay up a third of the night. His wife would stay up another third of the night. His daughter would stay up the other third of the night. So in that way, it's said that the house of Abu Hurairah, no hour of the night would pass without ibadah, right? Dhikr or salah. And today is the longest day. It's the shortest night. But even so, they would make sure that they split up their night. And Abu Hurairah says the reason that he answers these criticisms is the reason he knows so many hadith is that he would stay with the Prophet ﷺ. He would go hungry. He wouldn't eat. He just attach himself to the Prophet ﷺ all the time. And then, when the Prophet was not available, he would attach himself to some of the Sahabi, and he would ask them to narrate hadith. He would learn those hadith, he would write those hadith down, and then later on in the night time, he would memorize those hadith. So every night, he would be memorizing those hadith. And he says, basically, when the Sahabi were busy in the fields, or going off on battles, or doing their business, he would just sit and he would learn and memorize this hadith. So he basically devoted his life, these 3 years with the Prophet to memorizing these hadith day and night. And again, that's one of the reasons why he's memorized so many hadith, and that's why we owe a lot of our deen to people like Abu Hurairah, who given up a lot in order that they would help preserve the deen for us. So that's Abu Hurairah. A couple of other stories. We talked before about how the Prophet ﷺ, he decided not to expel the Jews of Khaybar. So he did, despite being victorious, show them some. He didn't vanquish his enemies as much as other people were expecting him to do, because the people of Khaybar had been plotting to do away with the Prophet, to assassinate him, to fund wars against him. And despite that, when he'd taken over the whole tribe, he didn't. They didn't become Muslim. He didn't hold a grudge against them, And then he agreed to them staying there and giving half their wealth to the Muslims, and then basically Prophet would then take some jizya from them. And we talked about later on that when. Later on, during the Khilafah of Umar ibn al-Khattab, he sent his son Abdullah, we just talked about, who'd gone to Khaybar along with some other people to do some treaties and collect some of this jizya. And, one of them was rolled off the top of a house and had broken his arms. The Khalif Umar got to hear of this, and then he basically said to the people in Medina, whoever has to realize a debt from the people of Khaybar, they should realize it, because I'm going to give orders that they should leave this place. And we said one of the conditions of the treaty was that the Muslims could cancel the agreement at any point in time. Another story is, and this we'll probably finish with this story, is the story of Hajjaj bin Ilat. Now, it's said that he was a merchant in and around Khaybar, or he was doing some business in Khaybar at the time when the Muslims came to attack. And again, we talked about how the Prophet launched a surprise attack on Khaybar. So he had some dealings with the people in Khaybar and dealings with the Quraysh in Makkah. And so he noticed during the battles what Islam was about, and the affection of the Muslims to the Prophet ﷺ. He'd heard, and then he started to hear what Islam was, and then he decided to become a Muslim. So he went to the Prophet ﷺ, and he declared his Islam and embraced Islam, became a Muslim. But then he said to the Prophet ﷺ, Ya Rasulullah, I have a lot of money owed to me from the people of Makkah, and I fear that if they find out that I'm a Muslim, they're not going to give it to me, because again, there's still this animosity despite the peace treaty. So would you allow me to go to Makkah and to say some things so that I can collect the money? And the Prophet said, yeah, that's fine. He got the permission from the Prophet ﷺ. He went to Makkah. And again, now in Makkah, people, because the battle's going on for many weeks, up to a month, the people of Makkah know that there's a battle in Khaybar, and they know of Hajjaj. And he enters through the gate, and he sees the chiefs of the Quraysh, and they're all waiting for news of what's happened to Khaybar, because he goes straight from Khaybar straight to Makkah. And so basically it's saying that all of the chiefs, because he's well known, they encircle his camel, and they're basically pleading with him to find out what's happened in Khaybar. And so he replies, oh my gosh, Muslim, the Muhammad has suffered an unparalleled defeat, and his companions have either been killed or captured, and he himself has been captured, and the chiefs of the Jews have decided to bring him to Makkah and to execute him before the very eyes of the Quraysh. And so all the Quraysh are just completely blown away by this, because this is the first time they've got first-hand information of what's happened in Khaybar. Obviously, it's a false report, but he's telling them that. So look, and because of this good news, I've come straight from Khaybar, and I want you to pay me all the money that's outstanding to me, all the debt that's owed to me, as early as possible, so I can go straight to Khaybar before all the other merchants go, and then I can purchase the slaves. So he comes up with this story that he needs all the money that he's owed, so he can go and get a good deal on all the wealth of the Muslims that's been captured by the Jews of Khaybar. And so the people, they're just really happy with this news, and obviously they give him all the money that he's due, and probably a bit extra, because he's brought this good news. But then when this news starts to circulate amongst the people of Makkah, you can imagine all the Muslims, all the secret Muslims, all the Muslims still being imprisoned, they get really, really depressed. And amongst them is Abbas, the uncle of the Prophet ﷺ. So he's sort of really depressed, and he sends his slave, and he's desperate to meet Hajjaj. So what happened? How can this be true? And you must be lying about this. So Hajjaj sees Abbas. Obviously, he knows who Abbas is, because he's a wealthy trader and a merchant, and he winks over at Abbas. So Abbas then sort of thinks, well, something's not quite right here. And then Hajjaj says, does a shahada that I'll tell you later. So then he goes and meets the Prophet ﷺ's uncle in secret at night, probably, and says, look, I've become a Muslim, okay? And I've hatched out this plan only to get the money that's due to me. But the real news is that on the day on which I left Khaybar, all the forts had been conquered by the Muslims, and so much so that the daughter of their leader, Huyay bin Akhtab, the daughter Safiya bint Huyay, she had been captured, and now she is now the wife of the Prophet ﷺ, right? But keep these facts secret until 3 days after I go back, right? So keep this to yourself. After 3 days, tell who you like. So then obviously Abbas gets some reassurance with that, and he's really happy. And then, according, as stated, on the third day, Abbas, he puts on his best dress. He perfumes himself with the finest perfume and the costliest perfume, the costliest dress, and he's proudly going around the Kaaba with his staff in his hand, and he's in a very pompous way. So the Quraysh are really surprised to see him like this. And so they basically says, you should be in the dress of mourning. Why are you so pompously dressed, with all your finery peacocking like this? And so then he says, right, the report that Hujjaj gave you was just a clever trick that he used to get the money you owed him. He has in fact embraced Islam. And on the day he left Khaybar, the Prophet ﷺ had gained the greatest victory, and all the Jews had been disarmed, and some of them had been killed, all the others had been captive, and basically you guys have been duped. And the Quraysh obviously became really sad on hearing this news, and then obviously news trickled in from other sources that basically, that's essentially what happened. So Hajjaj had taken all his wealth, double whammy, gone back, and again, that wealth was there in the service of the Muslims, and again, this news, was really bad for the people of Khaybar. One very final point is that we're talking about how the Prophet ﷺ had finalized the terms of the treaty with the people of with the people of Khaybar. And then he started sort of interacting with some of the surrounding tribes around Khaybar. And obviously, now that Khaybar had fell, a lot of the other Jewish tribes a lot of the other tribes surrounding Khaybar are realigning their politics and supporting the Muslims. And there's one tribe, the people of Fadak. They were just so scared or in awe of the Muslims that without even the Muslims saying anything or even threatening to go to Fadak, they sent an agreement to the Prophet ﷺ in Khaybar and said, we agree to the same terms that you've given the people of Khaybar. We'll give you half our wealth, we'll do the farming, we'll do everything, just, leave us alone. And the Prophet ﷺ, he accepted that. The lands of Fadak were given as a special gift to the Prophet ﷺ. This was his personal property, as it were, right? As Allah had sort of blessed him with, he hadn't gone searching for the spoils of Fadak. They basically gave up themselves, all of our land, all of our wealth. Just take it, And the Prophet said the Prophet would use the proceeds of the people of Fadak to take care of his family. So I'll finish there, inshallah. Next week we'll talk, inshallah, about the Prophet's marriage to Safiya binti Huyay. So the Jewish wife of the Prophet ﷺ. But until then, do remember us in your du'as, and do remember the ummah in your du'as. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Wa lasr innal insana lafi khusr illa alladhina amanu wa amilu salihati wa tawasaw bil haqq wa tawasaw bis sabr. Jazakallah khair. Assalamu alaikum.